and welcome back to Opal&Mint. I am Ashley, and today we're going to be talking about water control while watercolor painting. So if you've watched any kind of watercolor videos, you've probably heard the term water control by now, and you may be wondering what exactly that means or how exactly to master your water control while painting. Today I'm going to be talking about what water control is and how you can learn how to control the amount of water that is on your brush while painting, and what having too much water does or not enough water does in your painting, so that you can recognize when you need more or less water. And sometimes it can sound complicated, but it's really, really simple. And I'm going to try to break this down to where it's easy to understand, maybe give you some practices, some exercises to do to help learn and gain that understanding of water control on your watercolor brushes. So let's go ahead, turn the camera around. We're just going to go ahead and start. I'm going to say painting. We're not actually doing a painting. We're going to be doing some different exercises. I'm going to be showing you what all of these different things mean. So go ahead, turn the camera around and start painting. Okay, so there are several things. Actually, for this, we need to be zoomed out so you can see the water, because that's the main focus of this video, yes? All right, so there are several things that go into water control. It's not as simple as knowing how much water is on your brush. Yes, that is the main definition of water control, but it varies by brush. It varies by paper you're using. It can even vary by the paint that you're using, the brand, the colors, everything. So know that I'm going to be talking about this and trying to get you to understand it quickly, but do know that it will take practice to fully understand all of the different brushes and paper and all of that. So what I suggest when starting to try to master your water control is to pick one paper, stick with that, and pick one brush, and then move on from there. So try to master what all these things feel like with that one specific paper and brush, and then try to translate that into the rest of your, textures of papers and sizes of brushes and stuff. But I am going to cover a few different papers and brushes today, so I can show you the difference. But when you are going to practice this yourself, I suggest picking one type of paper and brush. Okay. The main important things that you're going to need to know or have when we're discussing water control, obviously your water. I prefer to have 2 cups. I have a dirty water and a clean water cup, because sometimes you need clean water to put on your paper before paint. And so I try not to cross-contaminate too much. I clean with the dirty water, and then I'll get clean water for the paper. Some people do cools and warms, and they have 2 cups that way, but this is the way I do it to keep clean water as long as possible. The paper towel. The paper towel is the most important water control tool. You can use other things. You can use a sponge. You can use an actual towel, like a washcloth or a kitchen towel or something. But having something to dab your brush onto is very important. And I think a lot of times, and I'm not painting yet, I'm just talking, but I think a lot of times in tutorials and stuff, you see people painting and then off screen they're dabbing. And I mean, even when I'm painting, a lot of times, because I want you to see what I'm painting, so I'm zoomed in. But that is a very important thing to know, is dabbing on your paper towel is one of the biggest things to master in water control. And so a lot of times you'll see me, like, I'll put something down and I'm like, oh, let me tap this off. And then I'll pick more water up until I have the right amount on my brush. So I'm going to try to have this in full view so you can see the paper towel, the water cups, and the paper. Okay. All that said, water control will vary depending on the brush. So a bigger brush, a longer brush, a fatter brush will hold more water. So like these two are close to the same length, but this one is fatter, fuller, so this will hold a little bit more water than this one. And then even when it comes to, let's say you have these are the same size as far as width, but this one is way longer. So like this one will run out of water very, very quickly, this little short one, because it's short. This one will hold water much longer. So let me wet these so you can see they're about the same thickness, but since this one is so much longer, it will hold water and paint a lot longer. And this also depends on the bristle type. So if you have a natural hairbrush, those will hold water a lot longer than synthetic. So there's so many things to go into water control, and that's why I suggest picking a brush and a paper and going from there. So I'm trying to decide what brush I want to start with. I feel like I want to use my black silver velvet. Where are you? So these are my most used brushes. I keep these in my travel case because I like to paint and travel a lot. I think I'm just going to take where are you? Where is my black silver velvet? There you are. All right, this is a size 8 round from black silver velvet. And this is a nice general typical watercolor brush as far as the size and shape goes. So I think I'm going to start with this one for this video. But again, something like this holds a bunch of water. This is a natural hair brush for me. This is a Kolinsky Sable brush. And so even though this one is really, really small, it holds quite a bit of water for how tiny of a brush it is. So take all of that into account, but let's go ahead and start. I need some paint, don't I? I'm going to break out the ocean paper paints because I'm so excited. I ordered another palette and I can't wait for it to get here. So I want to use some ocean paper today. Okay. So we've covered the water, the paper towels, the brushes. The paints will affect it some, but I don't think I'm going to go in depth with talking about different paint types with water control because it's not as much of a factor as some of these other things. So paper, we have a smoother paper and a rougher paper. Let me see if I can show you this texture. So we have a fairly smooth watercolor paper and then a pretty rough texture. When dealing with water control and your papers, your rough papers are going to need more water than your smooth papers. So I'm going to set the smooth one aside for now. All right, so let's go ahead and start painting. Let's see, I'm going to take a blue. So watercolors reactivate at different rates. If you are, beginner, basic, I'm explaining in these videos as if you are just beginning. So if you are familiar with watercolor, just, go along with it. Okay, so one thing that I suggest beginners do, I really didn't want to clean this, but I don't have another palette right now, is when they get paint on their brush, and I've talked about this in my Watercolor 101 video. So if you are more experienced, you can go from the paint to the paper and kind of know, if you're familiar with your paints, with those specific paints, you can kind of know how much paint to water ratios on your brush. But when learning water control, a really, really great way is you get your paint on your brush and then you put it on a palette. This is just a bathroom vanity tray, and it's not too expensive. I got this on Amazon. I'll link it below, but you can see the consistency of your paint to water ratio on a palette like this. So that's a very light wash. If we add some more paint, you can see the consistency gets thicker. And then let's add some more paint right here. So obviously this paint right here would be a light wash on your paper. And then this is getting less and less water to paint ratio, okay? So I'm gonna start with this thick amount. And one thing that I think is a great way to learn how to dip your toes into learning water control, but also one of the most important things I think in watercolors is to learn how to do your light washes. So we're gonna start with a thicker amount of paint, and I want you just to put this nice creamy thick paint on. And then next you're going to dip your brush once into your water, wipe it on the edge of the cup. So we're wiping a little bit of excess water off, and then you're going to go again. Now you can see all we did was take some pigment out of that. So there's more water to pigment ratio, but I didn't just leave it dripping, because if you leave it dripping, you'll have too much water on your page. So we're going to do it again. Dip and swipe And then we're gonna, for the last time, I'm gonna dip, kind of swirl, and then swipe a couple of times. And then there is your lightest wash of that color. So I highly suggest doing this with a few different colors of your paint. This is not only just water control, but this is learning to get different values from your paint. So it's kind of a 2-in-1. The paper towel, like I said, is a necessity in water control, but also learning just to wipe your brush on the edge of your cup so it's not just dripping with paint. All right. So as you see, I'm getting water and I'm putting it on my palette. So I have a light wash here. So that is one way of getting a lighter wash, and then mixing water on your palette is one way. So this obviously is a lot of water to paint. So I'm going to this here. And then as you can see, the water is running out. It starts dry brushing. And that's how you know that there's not enough water on your brush. Okay, so a lot of water control is when you're actually painting an object or something. So I'm gonna paint a circle real quick, okay? I hope that I'm not too all over the place. I'm trying to explain this in a simple way and give you some just nice, simple exercises. Okay, so I'm going straight from my pan to here. And I think just as I'm painting, I'm gonna talk about what's going through my head. So there is borderline not enough water on my brush, but it's just enough. Like that's kind of a good amount for what I needed here. Okay, so I want to darken up the edges and make this look a little more three-dimensional. So what I'm going to do, I don't have enough water left on my brush. It can feel it's a little bit starting to dry. So I can't go directly into this paint because it's not like sopping wet. So I need to get more water on my brush, and I'm going to swirl it in this paint. All right, and then I'm going to swirl it on the palette, kind of see what I have. All right, and then I'm going to tap it along the edge of this circle. Okay. And now what I want to do is, it's a pretty wet brush, so instead of just going to smooth this out, I'm going to go ahead, wipe it off on my paper towel because I want the brush to be a little bit more dry to smooth that edge out. And then I'm going to rinse it and then wipe it off because I want it, again, a little bit more dry to smooth that out. Okay, from there, I went straight into the paint, and my brush is pretty dry, so I'm trying to make mistakes to show you how to fix them. But as you can see, what my brush is doing, since I didn't add more water there, it's starting to splay, if that's the right word. But trying to get paint on the brush, and it does this, then you need a little bit more water on your brush. Unless you're going for a dry brush effect. So let's see what happens if I just do this, okay? So there's definitely paint on my brush, but you see how it's doing this dry brushing? This, again, is another thing of water control. This, if you're wanting to do dry brushing for texture on top of something, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of doing this. Then getting a drier brush, putting it into paint, you will get more of that effect. Okay, so I'm going back into the water. I'm wiping it off so it's not dripping. I'm going to swirl back into the paint, and then I want to go and deepen this up just a little bit more. Okay, I'm wiping it off because at that point I don't want any more. And then I have a circle. Okay, I hope that I'm making sense. I need to show you an instance where I'm putting too much water on the page. All right, I'm gonna go into this red. So this time I had dripping water from my brush, and I went into the paint because this paint hasn't been activated yet. So I needed enough water to activate this paint. Okay, so let's do a flower of sorts. I don't know what kind yet. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. I'm getting all this paint, and let's say I dip my brush in here and I don't swipe it on the cup and I go straight into this. This right here has a puddle of water. And so if I'm trying to, see, I'm making a big mess here. There's just too much water here. So I'm going to leave that and let that dry to show you what happens. I want to put a little stem here so it actually looks like a flower. All right, so I want to show you on this smoother paper. So I've got a little bit of paint. This is a fairly wet brush, and we're going to do some petals here. So from this point, I'm going to dip my brush, wipe it off on the cup, and then I'm going to do another petal. And you can see how much difference that made. And so I'm going to tap a little bit into here, and I'm going to put a little bit more on this petal. I am wiping it off because I want to wipe off the excess pigment so I can just smooth out the existing pigment there. And then my brush is starting to spread apart and dry brush, so I'm going to go back into the water, wipe a little bit off, and dip back in the paint. Okay, so if I dip in here and I don't wipe it off, this is really hard for me to do. You can kind of see, I'm hoping you can see it on the camera, but instead of having just a nice wet surface, you have like a puddle of water. And when you have puddles of water, like I did over here, and you'll see when it dries, it does what's called blooming. And so I've made this mistake here. I've got too much water here, so I'm going to dry my brush off, and I'm going to soak up some of that water, and then I'm going to go back into the paint and put a little bit of paint down. Okay. So being able to recognize when you have put too much water down is also part of water control, and then you know how to pick it back up. So I'm going to go, again, I'm going to dip in here. I'm not going to wipe it off. I'm going to take a little bit of paint. Whoops. And then I'm going to brush this on here. So again, this is just like dripping in paint, in water. And it's just a big blob of paint right there. So I'm going to dry my brush off, and I'm going to lift up some of that water so it's not so wet. And then you can go back in with more pigment. Okay. I hope I'm making sense. And again, you'll feel the difference between the smooth and the rough paper. I will do that on this one now. You'll feel the difference of the amount of water you need on your brush. And a lot of this is not something I can just tell you and show you. A lot of it you need to feel for yourself. And so I'm trying to show you things you can do for yourself to figure this out. But things that I do pretty much every time I'm getting my brush into the water, or if I'm putting my brush down, there's too much pigment or water, I will lightly tap. So getting in that habit of wiping your brush off, going into the paint or going onto the paper, or even there's times when I go from here to the paint, and then if I want that pigment but a little bit less water, I will go on the side of the brush for it to soak some of the water out to where I have more pigment and less water on my brush. So that's another thing to do with water control. So this time I'm going to go dip, swipe into the paint, and here. So this one has a little bit more water, and this one was more pigment and no water. And one thing you can tell from that, this is a little bit smoother of an application. I'm not sure if smoother is the right word, but it's more uniform application. When there's more water on your brush, you're going to have more pigment pooling, not pulling, but pooling. So there's more pigment here and less in the middle. And this one, the pigment is a little bit more evenly dispersed. I hope that I'm saying that in a way that makes sense. So I'm going to do again. This time I'm going to go into the water. I'm wiping on the cup. Going into the paint. And then again, I'm going to tap off on the edge. And then we're going to go here. So with less water, more even pigment, you're going to have a little bit more even paint application. So I'm going to go back in here. Wipe off, get paint. I'm not going to tap it off for this one. And then, ooh. Now, here's another thing. This has a lot more pigment on it, but you can still see the variation. It's not as smooth as an even of an application. But if you end up having too much pigment, again, you can always dip, swipe, tap, okay? And then you will automatically have less pigment on your brush. I really hope this is helping someone. I know that water control can be confusing. I want to get some paint and I want to try to show you the difference between the rough and the smooth and try to get the exact amount of water on the brush for both. So I'm going to get this blue like we had originally. And again, I'm putting this on the palette so we can see the pigment to water ratio that we're using. Okay, so I'm going to go on the smooth paper and just do a swipe, and I'm going to get the exact same, and I'm going to do a swipe on here. And then I'm trying to get it where it will dry brush quicker on the rough paper because it needs more water to get in all the grooves. I hope that is making sense. Oh, that's such a beautiful color. Yeah, so it's dry brushing more here than here as I'm running out of water. And I'm sure that makes sense. There's less texture, so you don't need as much water to get down in there. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to move on to another brush and do a background. Yes, okay. So I'm going to take Daniel Smith's Hooker's Green right here, and we're going to take a flat wash brush. So this is the Unshakable Joy 3/4 inch wash from Christy Rice. I'm going to take some clean water and I'm going to go into the Hooker's Green and let's do a swipe. Okay, so what does this stroke tell you? There's not enough water right here. It's running out of water. So you would, oops, not the clean water, get in the dirty water. Dip into your water and that smooths that right out. And again, if you're going for a dry brushing, see, you can get more pigment and less water and get that dry brushing. And that's learning your water control to know when you want to use what techniques. Okay, so I'm just going to get a whole bunch of paint here. Let's do a background real quick. So you can see I needed water. I'm trying to talk through what my brain is thinking, and it's sometimes I just do it, you know? So like I'll get it and, oh, see it's dry brushing, so I need more water. Smooth that out. There's a bit pigment stuck here and here, so I'm going to add more water. So let's say we want to add in another color to this, but we don't want to have any blooming, okay? So we want to have a 2-color background. I've got a nice amount of green down. I'm going to go into this other color here. Oh, I don't know if you saw that. I went here and then I tapped it off and then I went here and then I'm going to swipe so it's not dripping. And then I'm going to go into this. This is a paint that I made in my paint making video. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to this. And then we're going to put a little bit of this throughout. Now, I don't know if you can see here, there is a puddle of water here, and that's that right there is going to cause blooming. So I'm drying the brush off on the paper towel, and then I'm going to try and move it around, soak it up, make it to where there's not a puddle of water there. I went in, wiped it on the edge, and here we go. Okay, so I have a pretty wet surface now. So when we're painting wet on top of wet, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint flowers on top of this. It's wet, so the flowers are going to bleed, but we're going to do some kind of fading into the background. Let's see. I'm going to take this kind of brick red here, and I'm going straight from my brush to the paper. So let's see. Let's see what happens. So I went into here, I swiped it off, and then I went into my paint, and then I'm going to go onto the paper and do a few brush strokes. And as you can tell, since this is wet, it's kind of blending out. But as it dries, we can add more layers. So these will be like the ones in the background that are blurry. So I went back into the paint. There was enough water in the pan of paint that I could get some more. Okay, so here's another thing. This surface is fairly evenly wet. This right here is spreading more than this right here. Can you tell me why? Water control. The more water you have in your brush, the further it's going to spread into existing water. So let me explain. I'm going to get a bunch of paint on here, and then I'm going to dip it into the water. I have to swipe it off a little bit. It's just the dripping. So this is very, very wet. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, and with a wetter brush, it will move farther and have softer edges than with a drier brush. So those are going to bleed and blend quite a bit. I'm going to dry my brush off on the paper towel. I'm going to go into this same paint, and then I'm going to dry it off even further. This will be like dry brushing. And then again, the surface is still wet, but since the water in my brush is less, it's not going to bleed out quite as much as it does when you have water in your brush, because you're not adding more water to the surface. I hope that makes sense. So like this one will stay put a little bit more than this one. Okay. So I want to add a couple of, while this is still wet, I'm going to get some green for some stems. I think this is a fairly dry brush at the moment. So I want to, can you see over here? Yeah. Yeah. It's fairly dry. It's not having water pool everywhere. So if I go in here, the stems will not bleed a whole lot. So I want a little bit of water on here. So dip, swipe, and then I'm just going to go like this on some of these stems because I want just a faint bit. And then on this other one, I want it to be a little darker because the flower is. So I'm going to go into the same paint, tap off some water, and paint a stem. So again, same surface, different amounts of water in the brush. I hope that I'm making sense and that it doesn't sound like nonsense. Okay, so things to remember and to do with when you're learning water control. 1, paper towel, paper towel, paper towel. Always have one. This one's getting wet, and like there's some surfaces over here that are dry, but a high quality one is best. This is a cheap one that my husband got a different brand and I don't like it. But if you use an actual towel or a sponge or paper towels that are good, make sure that you can actually get water off of your brush when you're using it. So paper towel, swiping the water from your brush, huge. Using a palette to see your pigment to water ratio, and then just practicing a lot. And again, see, every time I go in and I do that. Okay, So I want to do a couple of more pigmented spots. So I'm getting some on my brush, and this is a fairly dryish brush. So I'm gonna go on top of the same flower that's kind of faded, and I'm gonna do a couple of darker strokes or more pigmented strokes. Let's see here. So we have a little bit of the faded back side of the flower, and then the front. There's still a lot of water on this one, so this is gonna be a little bit less, but that's fine because that one was really faded. This one has a lot of water in it too, and it's still very wet, so you can actually lift on this one. So let me show you what I would do in that instance. I'm going to clean my brush. We're gonna dry it off as much as possible, and then I'm gonna take it and lift paint, wipe it off, lift some paint. Since it is still very wet, I can go in and do this pretty easily. Okay? Okay. So I don't really need to finish this painting. I just need to move on, don't I? Okay, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna leave this unfinished. But, the point of this wasn't to make a painting, it was just to show you different techniques. So, okay. All right, so before, when I showed you, I'm about to wrap up because I don't want to do too much. But before I showed you to do kind of like a mask tone, which is as dark as the paint will go, dip, swipe, go, dip, swipe, go. Well, say you want to do a gradient. There's a few different ways you can do it, but I'm gonna get quite a bit of paint on the brush, and we're gonna start with that dark tone of this, and then we're gonna dip and then swipe it and then blend that out. And then I'm going to shake this in here, and then I'm going to wipe it off so it's not too wet. Let me show you what happens if it's too wet. So it's really wet. So it's just going to all go, like it's going to be flooded. Be flooded with paint. You're going to have the blooming. It's not going to be smooth and consistent. So to get a nice smooth ombre, because you can see the paint's taking the pigment. So we're gonna here, and then see, I felt like I had too much water on there, so I quickly dabbed it on the paper towel, and then I'm gonna dab it again to kind of smooth this out. And this is a very smooth paper, and I'm actually used to using a little bit more rough. So I'm even having to adjust the way I'm doing things. Yeah. But learning water control in your watercolor painting is one of the most important things to getting the techniques that you're wanting, the looks that you're desiring, and just knowing what too much water does, what not enough water does, what too much pigment to water ratio does. So again, just play. And yeah, I would love to know if you have any water control tips. Again, I've said this before, we have lots of many great artists who watch this channel. And so check out the comments, because I know that we'll have some other great tips for water control. And I'm sure that I'll think of some more things. I'm trying to like analyze what I'm thinking while I'm doing it, like why I'm going in water here, and so I'm hoping that helped, and I'm hoping that some of the descriptions of things helped a little bit. And if you want to see a part 2 on water control, I will try to figure out maybe some other drills and exercises that you can do to help learn water control. But hopefully, I'm going to zoom this in. I want you to see what's happening here. So you can see when there's too much water. I was talking about blooming before. So this one didn't actually end up blooming too much. It did a little bit here. You can kind of see it around the edges. But since this was the rougher texture, it needed way more water to bloom. But this right here, it's kind of doing like a backwash of water. So it's pushing that pigment back. So this part's drying, this part's wet, and it's pushing pigment. So therefore it's doing this bloom edge. So it's doing this like dark line edge right there. And so that's one of the things that, again, that can be pretty in watercolors, but it's also some things that people try to avoid. And when you're seeing that, that means you're using too much water. you haven't tapped your brush off or using too much water. As I'm looking right here, I can see on these swatches, like this has a bloom edge. And some of these I was trying to lighten up so you could see the different values of this particular paint. But like there's a bloom here. There's a bloom here. What paints were these? Oh, these are the Sennelier ones. And then, okay. Some paints bloom easier than others. But yeah, so there's a bloom here and here and here. Yeah, so just knowing what those things do and then learning how to correct it or do it differently is all I'm trying to accomplish here. So I hope this helped, and I hope it wasn't too just chaotic and nonsense. But if you did enjoy this video, guys, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any recommendations for future videos, something you want to see me go over, please let me know in the comments below. But if you haven't already and you want to see our future videos, hit that subscribe button down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. You're using... I'm trying to think of ways to teach this. I need, what do I need? Rolling with my homie.